Governor, thank you so much for being
Yes,
here.
yes.
This is a tough crowd. This is a crowd that's knowledgeable and very interested in what you got to say. We got a lot of ground to cover, and appreciate the chance to go over the issues with you. Look, the latest polls, Wall Street Journal, NBC poll today. America doesn't like either of them, Trump or Hillary. Negatives are both above 50%. You've said you sided with Bernie at 73% on 73% of the issues, at least 5%.
Well, I sided with myself.
Well, just give us
but then Bernie, then Bernie, which I thought was interesting.
Give us a sense of which voters, Trump voters or Hillary voters, you think you're more likely to attract to your cause, and why?
Well, I think it's going to be equal from both sides. With regard to Trump, I think that he's said 100 things that would disqualify anyone else from running for president of the United States. But if you just turn the page to tomorrow, it'll be 102 things. But for me, it started with the deportation of 11 million undocumented workers. I think that is a complete misunderstanding of the issue, and I am speaking as a border state governor. When he says that they are murderers and rapists, when they are absolutely hardworking, cream-of-the-crop workers that are not taking jobs from U.S. citizens, not taking jobs that U.S. citizens want. When he says he's going to build a fence across the border, I take exception to that. When he says he's going to kill the families of Muslim terrorists, I take exception to that. When he says he's going to bring back waterboarding or worse, I take exception to that. When he says he's all for free market, but he's going to force Apple to make their iPads and their iPhones in the United States, and that he's going to apply a 35% tariff to imported goods, well, who pays for that? And on and on and on. With regard to Hillary, I think that really that it's going to be status quo, that government is the answer to everything, which I don't believe government is the answer to everything. I think that government can play a role in leveling the playing field so that everybody has an equal shot. But I think at the end of the day, I think taxes will go up with Hillary. And then with regard to our foreign policy, and I'm not blaming this on Hillary, I'm not blaming this on Obama. They all seem to get involved in this, but when we intervene in other countries' affairs, bottom line is that the unintended consequence is that the world is less safe, not more safe. So libertarians are not isolationists. They're non-interventionists, which is to say, let's not get involved in other countries' affairs, that we should have a strong national defense. I stress the word defense, that if we are attacked, we're going to attack back. But if you take Syria and Libya right now, you can't make this up. The opposition in Syria and Libya is radical jihadists, and yet is ISIS, has given rise to ISIS. Was that done intentionally? I don't believe it was done intentionally, but that's what's happened.
I mean, Governor, your background is especially unique in this race. You've been described as an Everest-climbing, Ironman competing, self-made millionaire. I don't know if you've been asked this question, but I'm just curious, the Everest climbing part of it. What did you learn from that experience that makes you unique in this presidential race?
Well, through everything that I've learned being an entrepreneur my entire life and an athlete, is that life is putting one foot in front of the other. And it's also recognizing that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Just count on that. And it's how you deal with that that ultimately determines your success. Look, failure hits tomorrow. You can crawl up in a ball on the couch, say, I give up, I'm a victim, or recognize that that's the way it is and get up the next day with a smile on your face. I'm the guy that gets up every day with a smile on their face. I would like you all to know, I don't owe anybody a cent. I don't owe anybody a penny. I don't have a home mortgage. There are a lot of people with a lot of money. I have enough money to lay claim to this. And politically, I don't owe anybody anything politically. So I think I'm in a really unique position and was as governor of New Mexico.
But a lot of people sitting here at this conference will remember we were here last year with Rand Paul on the stage, who looked to be the hope of libertarians. Before that, his father, Ron Paul. What is the difference between what you're proposing, what you're doing on the campaign, and how are you going to make it past the finish line when he didn't?
Well, I'm asked all the time, why did Rand Paul fail? You know, why didn't people embrace libertarianism? Well, Rand Paul's not a libertarian. He's a Republican, and I don't want meaning that either as a criticism. But Rand Paul wants to build a fence across the border. They were all talking about, you know, just how punitive they were going to be when it came to the roundup of 11 million undocumented workers. And Rand Paul is a social conservative. And by the way, whether you're a social conservative or a social liberal, who gives a damn as long as you don't force that on others? Well, I think that Republicans, I think the Republican dogma is that they do want to force their social agenda on everybody else. And of all those candidates running for president right now in this cycle, they're all social conservatives.
Okay, but the same problem, you're going to have the same problem as Rand Paul would have, I imagine. You wake up January 2017, you're president. How do you get these two entrenched sides? How are you going to be able to get these two entrenched sides who can't work together to work with you?
Challenge Democrats on what they're supposed to be good at, which is civil liberties. They're supposed to be good on civil liberties. I mean, how about ending the war on drugs? How about legalizing marijuana? How about bringing an end to mandatory sentencing? That would be the Democrats' side, and that would be for starters. And then on the Republican side, look, smaller government is good, but don't pick and choose when it comes to smaller government. The military is included in that smaller government. And by the way, strong national defense, but the Pentagon itself says that we could cut back bases in this country by 20%. That's coming from the Pentagon itself. Well, you know why it doesn't happen? It's because elected representatives in those states where there would be those kinds of cutbacks refuse to allow that to happen. Term limits, I believe, is a silver bullet. If term limits were adopted, I think politicians would do the right thing as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected.
I want to get into drug policy with you, and I know the audience, we're going to leave some time for questions at the end, but let's talk about a couple issues of concern here in Silicon Valley, and that's tech policy is one of them. Hillary Clinton here in California this week unveiled her tech policy. She discussed broadband employment, expanding internet capacity, federal funding, federal support for the civic Internet of Things. What would be your tech policy? What kind of policy are you talking about? How much does government help what happens in tech? How much does it stand aside?
There is nothing I want to fix when it comes to the internet. And I think more than anything, it's just hands-off, that it is about equal opportunity. If I could take this opportunity to talk about tax policy, as President of the United States, if I'm elected, count on me to sign any legislation that simplifies our tax code or reduces taxes. But if I could wave a magic wand, I would eliminate income tax, I would eliminate corporate tax. Because we do that, we could abolish the IRS, imagine life without the IRS, and we could replace all of that with one federal consumption tax. I suggest that you look at the fair tax, which is a piece of legislation. It's been out there for maybe about a decade, but it dots the I's and it crosses the T's on how you accomplish one federal consumption tax. I think 80% of Washington lobbyists would get issued pink slips because that's why they're there, to garner tax favor. And I believe tens of millions of jobs would get created in this country, because why wouldn't tens of millions of jobs get created here with zero corporate tax?
But with regard to the government's role in the internet, as you know, I mean, the government helped create the internet in the 1960s. The government has had a hand in the internet for a long time. Where's the government role, say, with the iPhone, encryption and iPhone issues?
Well,
what's your policy there?
On encryption, I side with Apple. I really, government does have a role, and I do not want to, I don't want to ever come out sounding like there are no absolutes. As governor of New Mexico, as president of the United States, just look to me to make things more fair. If government has a role, but know that I'm a skeptic when it comes to this notion of government having a role. I think that for the most part, when government keeps its hands off, and by hands off, not leaving predatory practice in place, that government can play a role in taking away the predator, taking away crony capitalism. Crony capitalism, I think free markets really are the answer. When you're asked about, I think people have this notion, correct notion, that in 2008, the meltdown in our financial system was driven by the free market making some horrible choices. Well, why didn't the free market carry all the way through and bankrupted those companies, believing that no institution was too big to fail, as opposed to the government coming in, okay, free market on the way up, but crony capitalism, socialism, communism on the way down. That's what happened.
You recently referred to the EU as a giant bureaucracy and a crony capitalist institution. Do you think that the Brexit vote had nothing to do with immigration, with isolationism?
Well, it may have to do with I'm not supporting, first of all, I don't want to get involved in other countries' affairs, so the fact that Britain votes to get out of the EU, more power to them, but on the European Union, and can anybody here tell me what the European Union does, or any elected officials within the European Union, other than to set a myriad of regulation all around Europe that I think stifles trade, that it doesn't grow trade? I would like to think that Britain made the decision to exit from the EU for those reasons as opposed to the immigration issue.
But a lot of folks in Silicon Valley are concerned about the Brexit vote when it comes to the trade issues of how we're all going to work together and how Britain and the European Union will work. You don't see any kind of backlash there? You don't see any?
Well, I think that any investment in euro right now is going to be questionable for years. I'd be shying away from the euro. I think as a result of their exit from the EU that the United States will, from an equities standpoint, from a bonds standpoint, I think we're going to become the haven of money here, world money, for several years to come.
What about, you mentioned trade. Do you agree with Donald Trump that NAFTA was the worst deal ever?
Based on what I know about NAFTA, no. Believe me, I think that these trade agreements are laden with crony capitalism. Would I have signed NAFTA based on what I understand about it? Yes. I would also like to say that as governor of New Mexico, I may have vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined. That's how much of a skeptic I am when it comes to legislation. And so much of the legislation that I vetoed, I'll put under the category of crony capitalism, advantaging those that already had money and influence, and they were just trying to garner more money and influence. So,
what about his characterization of current U.S. trade policies as rape?
U.S. trade policies as rape?
Yeah, he has described...
rape for those that are wanting to compete with those that are involved. I'm not sure he's talking about rape of United States.
Correct.
I think that these trade deals, I think the Department of Commerce, look, I'm a skeptic. I think they restrict as opposed to open up.
But Silicon Valley has been very supportive of TPP. I think you've changed your position on it, have you not? And explain where you're at on it.
Well, no, based on what I know, but I'm a skeptic when it comes to TPP. So would I sign it or not? Based on what I understand, and what I understand is based on the people that are advising me in this process, whom I greatly respect, they're all saying that it does better than worse. So based on my understanding of TPP, I would sign it.
You would, okay. I want to talk to you about, we've got a lot of millennials in the audience, and there are a number of issues right here in the Bay Area that I think touch home with them. The latest studies show that 42 million people in this country owe $1.3 trillion in student debt. A lot of the folks out here facing that same thing. This is a huge issue for them. As a libertarian, How do you plan to address the student debt crisis? What would you do? What would you tell millennials who are feeling this crippling even before they get out into the job economy?
Well, I would point out the number one reason for the high cost of college tuition, and that is guaranteed government student loans. If guaranteed government student loans were to have never existed, I guarantee you that college tuition today would be half of what it currently costs, because colleges and universities are absolutely immune from pricing, because you as a student are guaranteed a government student loan. I think students today have been sold a bill of goods. You're graduating from college with a home mortgage without the home, and I would certainly look to legislation that would limit or greatly reduce interest that would get paid on student loans, fundamentally believing that students have been screwed.
But Governor, what about millions of people who've gone to college, who owe their college education to guaranteed government student loans?
Well, I am not for abating those student loans, but in this case, a greatly reduced interest rate. I mean, the rule of 72, if you're paying a 7% interest rate on your student loan, your equity or your indebtedness is going to double in 10 years. Would
a President Johnson reduce Pell Grants, reduce those kind of student aid, that kind of student aid?
Well, I would like everyone to understand that if nobody went to college next year because of the high cost of college tuition, what would happen to college tuitions? But that's a market-driven. That is something that would be market-driven, something that currently is not in place because the government has artificially put itself in the position of driving the market, and driving the market has resulted in higher costs than what would have been the case.
What about housing? This is another area of key concern to the millennials in this audience. San Francisco, Oakland, across the Bay, these are two of the most expensive housing markets in the country right now. How do you expect to help millions of millennials, particularly, trying to survive with service worker jobs, but at the same time trying to buy or afford housing? What's the answer here?
Well, the federal government does not have a role when it comes to affordable housing, but let's take San Francisco, for example, and let me just point this out. If San Francisco were to convene architects and engineers to design affordable housing without regard for zoning, without regard for rules and regulations associated with the building business, and I'm not believing that this would be unsafe in any way, but when you go to IKEA and you look at the 600 square foot room that has a toilet, a way to cook food, and a place to sleep, imagine what could be done when it came to affordable housing if none of those considerations were to take place. You could have a 30,000 unit affordable housing that would just blow you away with regard to what that final price would be for your affordable housing. It starts with zoning, and that's the reason why there's no affordable housing being built. I'm being redundant here. Architects and engineers design affordable housing without regard to any rules, regulations, or zoning. Watch what they come up with. Why can't that be funded as a big project?
So rent control?
Well, there wouldn't be a need for rent control because it would be so incredibly affordable.
What about minimum wage? This has been an issue here in the Bay Area, as you know, in California, $15 minimum wage. You've taken a position on what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know why we've set the minimum wage at $15. Why don't we go straight to 75? I mean, why don't we make ourselves just, the most prosperous country in the world? Well, the obvious answer is, well, gee, if you went to 75, nobody'd be able to afford it. Come on, minimum wage is minimum wage. What's the government doing declaring what the minimum wage should be? And a minimum wage, if it goes to 15, it's just going to get eaten up by inflation, and all of us know that, and that's just the formula. That's just the way that it works.
As you know, the critics say no one should have to be working full-time and still living in poverty. Walmart being taken as an example, where thousands of their workers are on food stamps. You don't think that is unjust or needs some kind of a government?
I have never known of anyone who works all the time and doesn't get ahead. I have not known that person.
You don't. Well, I gotta ask you all that. Immigrant workers, you don't think are working for all the time and not getting ahead? I mean, you don't see any kind of inequity there? And
by inequity, the formula for success in this country is working really hard, and then it does get coupled with prudent use of resource. Not, I mean, today we can go out and buy a $1,000 car that probably still has 300,000 miles on it. I mean, that's what exists today. I was going to do this, I haven't done it yet, but I was going to go to Goodwill and just maybe you think I went to Goodwill, but I was going to go to Goodwill and see what I could come out on stage completely dressed in what might amount to $20 worth of wardrobe. I'm just guessing, but you know what? Working hard in this country and it's one thing to be exploited, and I don't want to discount in any way how the marketplace may exploit, and as a policymaker, as President of the United States, how I might inject myself into that to prevent exploitation.
But isn't this one of the key issues driving the current presidential race? The idea that there are millions of Americans whose wages are stagnant, who can't seem to make it over the hump, who are one paycheck away from financial disaster, and yet they're working hard, they're working full time. Does that argument you don't buy that argument?
Well, but it's the continual human struggle, if you will. This is nothing new, and it's nothing that is not going to be new. I think when you have politicians that say that they're going to address this, and then they'll cite a number of initiatives, and don't you all know that at the end of the day that none of that's going to change anything? What can change, though, is this notion of level playing field. What can change is that there can be more equity in life, and policymakers can try to their utmost ability to achieve that.
Then the issue of income inequality, which we're seeing here in Silicon Valley, that is one of the key issues when you talk about cities like Palo Alto, other places where you see huge gaps in income and the issue of gentrification. How would President Johnson address some of those issues, or would you?
Well, by address, I would treat everyone equally, and if that is something that is actually achievable. Now, can you achieve equality? No, you can't achieve equality, but the promise that you can make is that you will do everything to always side on the side of less discrimination, on the side of more fairness. That does not involve, though, price fixing, rent control, setting minimum wage.
Let's go to some of the issues related to this when you talk about equality, crime issues. There's been a lot of talk this whole year about police, African-American relations, and Black Lives Matter. How do you see the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I think at the heart of police brutality is the war on drugs, and no one has been more outspoken than me on the war on drugs. In 1999, I advocated legalizing marijuana. I think it's the first step in really bringing about rational drug policy. I do believe that the reason that our police forces have become militarized is the war on drugs. And I think that if you are of color and you are arrested with drug possession, there's a 4 times more likelihood that you'll go to prison than someone that's not of color. So that's the heart of it.
What about legalization of heroin?
Legalization of heroin. I am not advocating the legalization of heroin.
Or other, I mean,
or other drugs, but a lot right now is being said about opioid
yes.
Death due to opioid. And what I'm about to say, I am not suggesting at the federal level, federal legislation to deal with this, but at the San Francisco level. If San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, were to open up clinics that you could come in as a heroin user, bring your heroin into the clinic, and have it tested as to its potency, quality, quantity, there would be a lot less death due to heroin overdose. There wouldn't be any death due to heroin overdose for those that utilize that service within the community. So there are programs in the world, Zurich, Switzerland, Vancouver, that come to mind that reduce death, disease, crime, and corruption with regard to drug policy. And we could be implementing those things in communities. And I would be an advocate. I think I speak to that as someone very informed.
Governor, as you know, California voters are going to decide this November on a marijuana initiative backed by Sean Parker and Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. Are you familiar with that? Do you support that initiative?
Well, I do believe that California is going to vote to legalize marijuana recreationally, and I do see this as the absolute tipping point. Half the states now have adopted medical marijuana, 4 states recreational, and the District of Columbia. Virtually every one of those initiatives have happened at the ballot box. I think when California does it in November, I think that you will have 20 state legislatures overnight just legislate it, and governors will sign or veto it. And there'll always be holdouts, but I really do think California holds the key to seeing an end to the prohibition of marijuana.
So do you endorse the initiative then, or have you taken a position?
Well, I'm going to always endorse anything that makes things better, and legalizing marijuana is definitely making it better. In Washington State, whether you recognize this or not, in Washington State, it's about the worst example I can think of legalizing pot. I think that that pot gets taxed at a 28% rate 4 times before it gets sold to you as the end user. And 2 summers ago, right after pot was legalized in Washington State, at one point, pot was selling for $26,000 a pound in Washington State. Now, what does that do for somebody who's been buying it on the black market? What it does is it says, I'm going to continue to buy it on the black market. Well, a legalized environment should provide the lowest costs, the safest way to do this. So what you had in Washington State is you had lines, city blocks long, to buy pot at $65 a gram. Are you doing the math here? That's $26,000 a pound. So it was all these people that had never used marijuana, but now that it was legal, they could do it. And for everybody else who'd been using it, nothing changed.
What's your position on the regulation of edibles?
Well, regulation from a health and safety concern, this is where government does have a role, protect us against harm. So are there regulations that actually would protect us? And in the case of edibles, was it Maureen O'Dowd?
Maureen Dowd from the New York Times.
Maureen Dowd?
Yeah.
She goes and does edibles in Colorado. You remember this story? She goes and does edibles, and they're not working, and they're not working, and they're not working. And she ended up, by our figuring, she ended up consuming 400 milligrams of pot. I'm believing that would have been like 3/4 of a bottle of tequila. Would she have been saved by regulation? Well, not really, because she kept on popping them. But I mean, education, and of course, none of us are going to disagree with that. But protecting consumers, if a 25 milligram dose is going to prevent people from having a bad experience, I mean, this. Look, I applaud the states that have legalized pot. I applaud Colorado. I mean, they're taking steps that California may or may not follow, but it's a new frontier, and I think we're going to work our way through the issues regarding regulation and taxation, and at the when it's all said and done, we'll all be living better lives.
I just want to, you were the CEO of a company, and I think this is another area where your resume is so different from everyone else out there, Cannabis Sativa, which is a company involved in pot.
Right.
And personally, you've said you've been a regular smoker for years, but you're not now.
Right. Well, by regular smoker, I am in health. I'm into health and wellness. So I've got an aversion to smoking. So with the legalization of marijuana and edibles, wow, wonderful. I mean, this is my own experience. I've always said that, and I don't want to cast aspersion on anybody here. Okay, meaning. The fact that you drink or the fact that you use marijuana, more power to you, as long as you don't put yourself in a position of doing anyone else any harm. I haven't had a drink of alcohol in 29 years. I don't say that from the standpoint of you shouldn't. I'm just saying for me personally, I haven't had a drink in 29 years. As governor of New Mexico, I did not consume any marijuana. But I have consumed marijuana as the CEO of a marijuana company, and being kind of a health and wellness nut. I thought I was really probably a pretty good guinea pig to actually look at the products that exist. By look at them, actually consume the products exist. All that said, I have never advocated that you should do marijuana or alcohol and be on the job, that you should be impaired on the job. I have a job right now running for President of the United States that is 24/7. It is. And if elected president, that's a job, and I base that on having been governor of New Mexico, that's a job that's also 24/7. So I'm not consuming any marijuana in my current job, nor would I be in what might be my future job.
Then you don't intend to be the first to smoke on the Truman balcony.
Well, now smoke, everybody keeps coming back to smoke. That's the great part about this legalization thing, is you don't have to smoke it anymore.
Oh, okay.
And no, I wouldn't be doing the edible side
on the Truman
either.
balcony.
All
I
right.
have a question from my millennium son on this. What's your favorite strain?
Well, my favorite is the assets of Cannabis Sativa, the company that I was involved with, is arguably has the best strain of marijuana in the world, and also arguably has the best marijuana high in the world. I will also point out something here that maybe most of you don't know. Everything in California is illegal right now. Everything. It's a wink and a nod in California. So we, in Cannabis Sativa, everything that's produced in any state in the country where it's legal, so half the state's medicinal, 4 states recreational, District of Columbia, everything that's produced in any state has to be grown, processed, packaged, and sold in those states by residents of those states. Well, that is not a good consumer model. So our number one marijuana high in the world, which at some point we'll actually all be able to recognize, it can't be produced legally anywhere in the country. And as a publicly traded company, something that I had to steer in this direction is, as a publicly traded company, we can't do anything illegally, nothing.
We're going to open up to questions. Just one last question on the regard to sort of social issues and libertarianism. Do you also support the decriminalization or legalization of prostitution?
Well, I do think that that's a state's issue, and although I've never engaged in the services of a prostitute, if I were to do that, where would I choose to do that so that I know that I would be safe, and I would mean sexually transmitted diseases? That would be Nevada. So I think that states should determine these issues along with municipalities, but I do think it's something that states and municipalities should consider. That the harm from prostitution is that it's illegal, it's criminal. So there's violence and there's drugs and there's all sorts of bad things that don't actually have to do with the product itself.
And the criticism that it encourages human trafficking, exploitation.
I see it just the opposite. I see just the opposite, that all of those things would actually go away. Human trafficking is a result of the fact that it is illegal.
We got a couple of minutes left. Let's open it up for questions from the audience here. We got some back there. Let's start that. Oh, okay, good.
I'm so happy to meet you. When I think of my youth, I always looked, for my job, I need to be positive. I'm a venture capitalist, and I have to look at the bright future. And when I was younger, I saw Reagan, I saw Milton Friedman, and there was always optimism toward the future. Can you think of anything positively pro-growth or pro-freedom that's happened in this country in the past year? And how can you continue to be an optimist?
Well, no, I don't. I couldn't be running for president if I wasn't an optimist. And I know an earlier question was about civil liberties, the due process. The NSA is spying on all of us. 110 million Verizon users.
Something positive.
If I'm elected president, I think I have an opportunity to do just that. I really do. It's not around the edges, but it is taking the system on. And I don't see Donald Trump. I see Donald Trump tweaking it in a way that's much worse, and I see Hillary as being very, very status quo, that nothing will change.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I'll get to you. You'll be next.
What one book would you recommend to open people's hearts and minds to liberty?
Well, I really like Ayn Rand. I do like Fountainhead. I think it, kind of a simple story, but it kind of hits it on the head. It's affordable housing.
Okay, you got one back there.
Okay, this being San Francisco, this is a question that has to be asked. In regards to the Orlando shooting, the worst mass shooting in U.S. history, you had the NRA basically said that if more people had guns at the nightclub, there would be more survivors. What are your thoughts on gun legislation after that?
Good question.
Well, by the way, all questions are good.
Yeah.
Never qualify anything
Just
by
true.
good question,
Very
because
good
that
point.
means everybody else's question's bad.
Good point, Governor.
So I think that we really need to be open to a debate and a discussion of how we keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill, and that we need to have an open debate and discussion on how we keep guns out of the hands of would-be terrorists. As President of the United States, and this is something I really enjoyed doing as governor, but I would really love to have a sit-down with the FBI and understand what transpired, given that they interviewed this guy 3 times. But that said, these lists that the government has come out, the no-fly list, there are active members of Congress on that no-fly list. Whenever you have government lists, it's subject to error. And if I might pivot to the death penalty is subject to up to 4% margin of error. And if you're one of those 4%, that's why the death penalty is flawed public policy. So the gun issue, these lists, if we should be open to the notion of providing more resources so that the lists are more accurate, providing more resources to potentially be able to, if we are going to restrict a person's ability because they're on the list, then there should be more resources addressed to how you might be able to appeal that.
Could you control magazine sizes, background checks on ammunition, such as been proposed in California?
By now, I mean, there has been a really, I think it's been enlightening discussion because of what happened in Orlando, but there are no automatic weapons allowed. There are no automatic weapons. There's no machine guns They've been outlawed for decades. And a semi-automatic rifle, the category that an assault rifle comes under, which is just a heading, there are 30 million of those weapons in circulation right now. So when you talk about limiting the number of rounds in a magazine, it's not anything that is going to deter someone from being able to get a bigger clip if they want a bigger clip.
Gary, you got somebody else?
Hey, thank you so much for coming. It's great to have you here. I'm Jamal Sal. I'm in law school at Indiana U in Bloomington. And my question is, what are your thoughts about criminal justice reform for youth who have had drug-related issues?
I think there needs to be a pardoning process right now for those. There are tens of millions of Americans who are convicted felons that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. And when it comes to kids and the record of drugs, this is a process that occurred after the prohibition of alcohol ended, where pardons, mass pardons went out, and I think it needs to be part of this process. We have criminalized tens of millions of Americans, most of whom have served out their sentences, but the number one category of prisoner in federal prison today is the prisoner that's there on mandatory sentencing, 3 strikes, you're out, and it's the person who has sold small amounts of drugs on numerous occasions and been caught.
Oh, good question right here. We got time for one or two more? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay.
Hi. So we've been talking a lot today about polling and analytics and targeting and things like that. There was a piece in Reason very recently talking about the ability for you to get to 15% in the, according to the pollsters, 15% favorability, which would put you on the stage in the debates. Could you talk about your strategy to make that happen? And could you also comment about the fairness or the equity of the polling? I mean, are the pollsters not getting to your people, and is that a problem?
Well, so I would not be doing this if there weren't the opportunity to win. Why do it? But to win, the only possibility that I have of winning, and that also goes for Bill Weld, my running mate, is if we are in the presidential debates. Only way. Super Bowl of politics. 100 million people tune in, they watch the presidential debates. Presidential Debate Commission has said that you have to be at 15% in the poll in the polls to be in the debates. They don't tell you which polls. Well, seven weeks ago, my name was appearing in about 1 out of 6 polls. Right now, what they're doing is they're polling Trump and they're polling Clinton, and then whenever my name is added as the next category, I'm at 10% consensus. If they'll just take the next step and start asking 3 names, I don't think there's any question that I will be at 15% and that I will be in the national debates and that I will have the opportunity to win. Rasmussen came out with a poll today, a national poll, and the poll went Trump, Clinton, and 12% for another candidate, and never mentioned me by name. Mm-hmm. That is. I think there's a lot that you can do. It's a rigged game. It's a rigged game that goes completely unnoticed by everybody. These polling organizations, when you call them up and say include Gary Johnson's name, they'll say we're above that. We're nonpartisan. We're all about equity. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know as they don't have other polls that are commissioned by Democrats and Republicans to their polling organization that amounts to millions of dollars a year for their polling organizations. And if they include my name, well, maybe they're on the skids with these other dollars that they generate. It's an unfair game. In 2012, I ran for president, and I started out as a Republican, and in the debates, they would say that you had to be at 2% in A, B, C, and D poll. My issue was that I wasn't in A, B, and C poll, so that meant in D poll I had to be at 8%. Well, that's exclusion in a way that goes completely unnoticed by everybody. I've had it said to me, gee, it's too bad you didn't catch on in 2012. Well, no, that really wasn't the case. In 2012, whenever my name appeared, I was equal to or ahead of those that were on stage. But that's the manipulation. If you all have insights into how this can change, please go at it. And we are suing the Presidential Debate Commission. We're suing the Presidential Debate Commission also on behalf of the Green Party, although the Green Party did not have to put up a penny in the suit that we filed. It was from a fairness standpoint. Our contention is that if you are on the ballot in enough states to mathematically be elected, 270 electoral votes, then you should be included in the presidential debates. I will say that myself and Bill Weld are going to be the only third party on the ballot in all 50 states. There may be 25 third-party candidates, but you can say you're a third-party candidate even though you're on the ballot in 7 states. We're the only third-party candidate on the ballot in all 50 states. My understanding, the Green Party will be on the ballot in 37 states, which is the same as it was in 2012.
Personal privilege with the last question. Governor Johnson, thank you for being here. What can people in the audience and online do to help?
Well, that you're sitting here, thank you very much. Really, it's a terrific opportunity, and I applaud each and every one of you. Something that I say to people all the time is so much talk is being given of jobs when so much talk should be given to being an entrepreneur, creating your own job, creating jobs for others, and that's what you all are engaged in, and I am not worthy. Thank you very much.
Governor Gary Johnson.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.